Hello YouTube! Today I want to discuss two themes that are omnipresent in the world of fitness and bodybuilding, namely ambition and selfishness. Ambition because there are a lot of people who are willing to do anything to accomplish their dream, even if it means taking steroids and dying an early death. And selfishness because these very same people have families, they have friends, they have communities who care about them, and yet they are willing to sacrifice all of that in order to achieve that dream. The dream becomes the only thing they care about at the expense of everything else. And that mindset is now more and more widespread. More and more young men are going down that path. And I think that we should not dismiss them as simply stupid. It's a temptation of natural lifters to just say that whoever falters is an idiot and they just should be ignored. And the problem is that this doesn't actually help anyone. The problem also being that even if you have not yet given up to the temptation, you might still be tempted. So I think it is extremely important that today we answer the following question. What would you sacrifice for gains? We might actually end up seeing that there is no answer to that question, but actually making the effort to try and answer it is super important. So my goal in today's video is going to offer a philosophical analysis of that dilemma, as well as an observation of the psychological reasons behind that choice. I want to observe the motivations that push people to these extremes, because if we can understand the motivations, then maybe we can fix the problem. That's a maybe, but I have high hopes. Note that, of course, this means that I will have to discuss drug use in this essay, but it won't be the crux of the argument, because I really want to approach the question of all or nothing thinking globally. And that, of course, includes drug use, but I want to focus more importantly on the consequences that this ideology usually has on those who follow it. And to do that, I decided to approach these themes through the lens of fiction. If you're familiar, this is now, I think, the third installment of the series in which I take a piece of fiction that I like and I use the characters and the themes of the piece of fiction in order to develop a certain question that I think would be beneficial for us all. And today, the piece of fiction I selected is one that contains a very specific type of character that I like a lot because they tend to be of great help when it comes to reflecting on our own decisions and, most importantly, our own desires. And that is the Faustian character, which is a trope that I'm certain many of you are very familiar with. It is the trope of a man who sells his soul in order to achieve his ambitions. So, of course, it's extremely relevant to today's theme. And if you have actually recognized the thumbnail, you already know which character I selected. He's extremely famous. I'm of course going to talk about Toguro from Yu Yu Hakusho. I also have the Yu Yu Hakusho cap. And if you have never heard about it, you don't know who Toguro is or what Yu Yu Hakusho even is in the first place, you don't have to worry because, as I said, it's a trope. So any relevant plot point will be extremely easy for me to share with you. Even if you don't know the story, you will not be missing anything. But be warned that, of course, this video is going to contain spoilers. So if you have not yet read Yu Yu Hakusho, you can just pause the video. It's bad for the watch time. I don't give a fuck. I think that you really should be experiencing this series because it's one of my favorite. It's extremely short. It's available on YouTube in anime form. So you really should run to watch it, consume it, then come back to the video. And the reason why I decided to select Toguro for this video is because I believe him to be one of the greatest villains ever created, which is not surprising because the author, Togashi, is known for making good villains. And I think the reason why he's so talented at it is because he never really tries to create villains. He creates interesting characters and then he pins them against whoever he selected as a hero, which oftentimes also isn't a hero. If you have read Hunter x Hunter, you know that Gon isn't really a hero, and Yuzuke from Yu Yu Hakusho also isn't one. And this is what gives depth to the character and why there is so much to say about them. It's because Toguro is not a bad person. And the story never tries to tell you he's a bad person. Instead, you're only shown his character arc, the choices he made for his life, And then it's up to you to decide if you agree with the choices or if you think that he made a mistake at some point. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to observe his life choices and see if maybe it's going to reflect what we could be doing in our life and the consequences. Would they be good or bad? And should we follow him in his path or not? Now, of course, he's a fictional character, so the choices that he made and the scenarios that surround them are not going to match your experience. But if you look at it through symbolism, you'll realize that most of these dilemma that he went through, you are going to go through as well. So this is why I think we need to keep a close eye on him. And that also goes for the ideas that he represents. Because as a character, he of course embodies a lot of things. And as a villain, he embodies a lot of things that society deems taboo, that society rejects even as bad. Which is why, and I've explained that in a previous video you can find in the description, so many young men relate to literally me characters because they represent a part of themselves that they are told is bad and should be rejected, but that these fictional characters get to embody and get to live. And that is fascinating because through them we can learn about us. And it's an outlet. You know, I've always thought that the issue with morally condemning something when everyone pulls together as a society to say, oh, this is bad, is that it never really works fully. Meaning that, of course, there are people who are going to be compelled to never actually do these things because they're going to be afraid to be rejected. But the portion within their heart, the desire of the individual to actually do these things, that goes absolutely nowhere. And the same is true for PDUs. PDUs and drug use is completely illegal in most countries. It is extremely dangerous, and yet young men still do it. Why? Because even though there is a moral taboo surrounding the thing, the actual desire to do the thing is not gone, it's still there. And so if we are to fight that impulse and that portion, what we need to do first and foremost is to accept the portion and then look at it logically, not through morality, and try to explain and understand through the history of Toguro, a man who gave up to the temptation, why this was actually a bad idea in the first place. So as you understand, my goal won't be to judge or shame Toguro or anyone who gave up to the temptation, but instead to compare his demons to the ones that we lifters have to face on a daily basis, to try and explain why his morality, the one he followed in his life, actually failed to lead to a good life. Which connects back to what I said at the start of the introduction. We have this tendency to think, especially in the West, that as long as you fulfill your dreams, you will be happy. The story of Toguro proves that this is absolutely not true. So let's discuss it together. And to do that, to be complete, I cannot just talk about Toguro. I also have to talk about Yuzuke, who is the hero of the story who opposes Toguro. And I use hero very loosely because, as I said, Togashi doesn't recreate heroes. All of these characters are morally ambiguous, which is why they're so interesting. But since their relationship as hero and villain is central to the theme of the story, and therefore my ability to use the story in this video as its backbone, I have to give you a quick rundown if you've never actually read Yu Yu Hakusho. So, very simple. Yuzuke is a young teenager who eventually sacrifices himself to save a young boy, and he dies. But because he was never supposed to sacrifice himself, because in the grand book of heavens, he was seen as a delinquent, as a bad boy, a bad guy, it was never in the plans that he would sacrifice himself for someone else, so he wasn't supposed to die. So there's no place for him in heaven, so he's stuck in limbo. And since he's stuck in limbo, he's given a choice. He's told, hey, you can stay in limbo, or we can send you back to Earth. You can get back to your life, but if you are to do that, you have to fulfill a few missions first. And this is when the adventure starts. He fulfills the missions and he starts to discover the spiritual world. And it is in this spiritual world that Yuzuke meets Toguro. Toguro, who is at first just presented as a random villain, but who eventually becomes much more than that, because he's both a mirror and also the opposite of Yuzuke at the same time. And that's what we're going to be discussing right now, because this is all of the information you really need. So what you need to understand about Toguro first and foremost is that at the start of the story, he is your typical villain, meaning that he barely speaks and he really only exists as an excuse for the hero to become stronger. It's just a wall that Yusuke has to surmount. So that's it. It's as dumb as that. He has to get strong enough to beat Toguro's ass, and that's it. And we even see that in the way he's being characterized at the very start of the story, because he's literally evil for the sake of being evil. You don't know why. He kills people and he hurts innocents just for fun. Apparently, that's what we see. He's a meathead, he has big muscles, and he's a henchman. So he's someone who works for money, who's willing to kill others for money, and he just blindly obeys order. He doesn't seem to have a personality of his own. He doesn't have to have dreams or objectives. He is just like a Terminator. He's just a robot that obeys orders, and that's that. Or at least that's what the story wants you to believe, because you quickly realize that all of that is just a facade. It's the image that he presents to the world, but that is not actually true. And there are small glimpses and details that reveals that all of that was just a lie. First and foremost, the fact that he has empathy. So you have a scene, for example, where he's faced with like a giant mutant tiger, and he refuses to kill it at first because he doesn't like to hurt animals. He eventually does it because he is forced to by his boss, but he didn't want to do that. He doesn't take pleasure in killing innocent creatures. At some point, he also tortures a woman, and he clearly tells the woman, hey, next time just do what you're told so that I don't have to torture you because I don't enjoy it. So he does have empathy, but he suppresses it, which might even make him more evil, because who's more evil? Someone who has empathy and decides to act against it, or someone who has no empathy and hurts others because he doesn't know it's bad? That's already an interesting question, one I'm not going to answer here. You can tell me in the comments what you think. The second point that proves that there's more to him than just a villain is that his goal in life isn't wealth. He's not actually working for money. The one thing that he cares about is strength. So he will do anything in life in order to be able to face strong opponents, which is not much better, but we'll see later that even that is a facade. Even that is not true, because there are many layers to Toguro, and even the one that I'm peeling right now is not his true face, but we'll get to that. And then the third detail and the third, in a sense, indice that reveals that, again, he is a deep character is that he only obeys himself. He only really fights for himself, not for others. And that gives depth to the character, because now the character has a moral background, meaning that we know what he stands for and we know what he doesn't like, which is not something that is often awarded to evil characters. We have this tendency to believe that if a character is bad or evil, then this must mean that he doesn't have any morality and he's just simply amoral. But I have found that times and times again that is not true. An example that I think is going to speak to everyone watching here is Joker from The Dark Knight. Many people seem to believe that the character of the Joker has no morality, but that's nonsense. He has a morality that is akin to chaos, but a morality nonetheless. And that speaks to me to the idiocy of the concept of immoralist. So if you're familiar with Nietzschean philosophy, you know that Nietzsche himself described his work as one of an immoralist, meaning that he didn't have a morality. And as much as I like Nietzsche, it might shock some of you guys, I agree with that. Because Nietzsche had a morality. Master morality, for example, is a morality. Will to power is a morality, because there are ways to approach life. Ways to claim that certain ways of life are better. As long as you have that, you have a morality. So Joker has a morality. He believes in chaos, he believes in randomness, and that in itself is also a morality. So in reality, when people say that a character is amoral, what they really should say is, this character goes against society's morality. It goes against what most people consider good. But just because someone is not good doesn't mean that they are suddenly completely devoid of a moral compass. Their moral compass might be pointing south, while yours and most people's is pointing north. As such, for example, Toguro doesn't kill people because he's just evil and he just likes to kill for the sake of killing. He does it because it aligns with his morality. His morality that dictates that those who lack the strength to protect themselves and their own lives don't deserve to live. That, of course, is a very extreme morality, one that I don't subscribe to, one that no one subscribes to, but what matters here is not that. I think many people get stuck in this good or evil binary mindset, which makes them lose sight of the objective, because what is the objective today? The objective is for us to look at the motive. So what could be the motive of that? Well, if we look at the story, it's clear. The reason why Toguro thinks this way is because of his past. At some point when he was still a human, because yes, of course, I forgot to tell you at the start that Toguro was born a human but eventually turned into a demon, which of course strengthens the opposition between him and Yuzuke because Yuzuke is a human, although if you have watched Yu Yu Hakusho, you know that this is not true, because, and this is a big spoiler, but I warned you, Yuzuke is also a demon. And the point of me saying that, and even the point of that being in the story in the first place, is clear. It shows that even if someone is born human or demon, doesn't really matter. What matters is what they do with that condition, that demon or that human condition. And what Toguro used to do with that human condition was commendable. He had friends, he had people who cared about him. But at some point, that group of friends he had, with whom he partook in battle, he would actually participate in tournaments with, got completely wiped out by a demon. And Toguro was completely unable to defend them from said demon, which then prompted him to try and take revenge, which he did. He managed to take revenge, and a year later, he killed that demon. And by doing that, he won a tournament and he earned a wish. And the wish that he selected on that particular day was to leave humanity behind, meaning that he became a demon himself. That is what motivated him to become a demon. So we see that his sense of morality, as warped as it may appear, is therefore the direct consequences of his life experiences. And while this is clearly exaggerated, keep in mind that this type of all or nothing thinking is actually quite common in real life. It won't happen because a demon killed your friends, but it might be that you eventually face a crossroad in your life where you go down a path of just absolute, or you decide that everything else is going to be pushed to the side because you have been forced into that path by your circumstances. And the reason why you would go down that path is also very easy to understand. When you are in a crisis in life, a very stressful situation, and you are surrounded by choices and nuances, it can become very confusing. And you might want to cut down all of these nuances and all of these choices and focus on one path, focus on a single-minded approach to existence. Because not only would that reduce the headache, it also doubles as an umbrella for pain. What I call an umbrella for pain is exactly what Toguro did. So in his case, the reason why he decided to leave his humanity behind is because with his humanity also came pain. It came the grief of having to deal with the loss of his comrades and of the people that he loved. So by becoming a demon, he also managed to let go of that pain because as a monster, he didn't really feel emotions anymore, or at least that's what we're led to believe, and he also didn't feel any pain. But it goes deeper than that, because in accepting that deal, he also, in a sense, managed to rewrite history. Because now his new sense of morality is that if you're too weak to defend yourself, you deserve to die. And that's exactly what happened to his friends. So now, instead of blaming himself for the death of his friends, he was able to blame them. He was able to tell himself, there is no reason for me to mourn them, they just got what they deserve because that is the way the world works. And of course, and this is the point of this video, we'll see that it didn't actually work. Because what Toguro did when he completely pushed away everything that used to be him is that he engaged in what is called in philosophy self-denial, a form of self-denial that was also disguised as morality, which is often the case. The action of self-denial is one where you renounce portions of yourself and you renounce portions of existence. In this case, it was friendship, it was pain, it was mourning, it was loss. All things that Toguro was suffering from and that he thought he would be better off without. But by severing that part of himself, he also cut deep into his own flesh. And that did not do him any good because the pain actually never went away. And on top of that now, he had to deal with a new pain, the pain of punishment. Because, and this is a theme that I'm going to discuss later in the video, self-denial is always a form of punishment. One that attempts to pass as morality and therefore as something that is good. But if you actually observe the consequences, it's never actually good because it shuts you off from who you are, but worse, it shuts you off from life itself. And this is what I like so much about Yu Yu Hakusho, is that it beautifully underlines the absurdity of sacrifice. In male power fantasy, the theme of sacrifice is often presented as good. It is good to sacrifice yourself. But in Yu Yu Hakusho, when you look at Toguro's sacrifice, you quickly realize that this is not always true. Just because you are willing to give up a part of yourself does not mean that the consequences are going to be good, either for you or for the world around you. And we have a tendency to view selfless behaviors, and I will go back on that notion of selfless, because sacrifice most oftentimes is not selfless at all, as inherently masculine. So it's masculine to sacrifice yourself, and I don't disagree with that. But where I disagree is in the idea that it would always also mean that sacrifice would be virtuous. Because the truth is that nothing is more common than a stupid sacrifice. People giving their life for stupid causes is widespread, and I think that PDUs is one of them. But not just PDUs. Look at the amount of people who are willing to kill themselves for an ideology, who are willing to sacrifice everything they have for a group or for even an abstract notion. People are willing to die for concepts nowadays, and that doesn't make it good. Just because you give up your life, just because you engage in the act of sacrifice, doesn't automatically make the cause righteous or even, as I said previously, selfless. Because your reason for sacrificing yourself might be purely selfish. And the best example I have of that is suicide bombings. People who kill themselves for religious ideals. Is it because they believe it's going to create a better world? I mean, it never does. It leaves corpses behind, that it does, but deep down, I think the reason why these people do that is not because of that. That is just morality. It's a lie. Just like with this notion of self-denial, because again, suicide bombing, kamikaze bombings are a form of self-denial. You deny yourself the right to live. But why do you do that? Well, a lot of these people do that because they expect a reward. They expect a reward in the other world. They expect that our life in heaven is going to be better than life on earth. So it's not selfless at all. It's actually super selfish. And it's of course not righteous at all, because I don't believe that there is any cause that actually would justify killing innocent bystanders. That is a discussion for another time. There is a character in Full Metal Alchemist named Scar, who is essentially a suicide bomber and a terrorist. And I might eventually make a video about him because I think it is extremely interesting to discuss the morality that surrounds the terrorist dilemma, but that will be for another day. So let's get back at the topic at hand. Why did I tell you so much and divulge so much about Toguro's history and all of these things about self-denial? Well, it's because I believe that all of that also applies to PD users, meaning that to me, PD users are not amoral. They simply have a complete different take on morality. And oftentimes, natural lifters dismiss these people as evil, right? Oh, you take drugs, you take PEDs, you are a bad person. I personally don't believe that. I think that taking PEDs is a bad thing, not that it makes you a bad person. And I would even go as far as to say that we could find some logic behind their actions. There is an actual motive. Again, just saying, oh, they're stupid. Yes, you are right, they're stupid in that the consequences are going to be dire. But the reason and the motives behind the action, we perfectly understand. You understand as well. Don't play dumb. We know why people would be willing to sacrifice so much for gains. It's because it is seductive. It's a desire we all have. Some of us have more restraint. Some of us are not going to give in, but the temptation is still there. And so to accept that the temptation is real, in my opinion, is the right attitude to have, because again, to just reject these people as evil is deeply ineffective because it ignores the reasons that might have led them to go down that route in the first place. Instead, it would just be focusing on creating a moral distinction between naturals and drug users, aka between good and evil, and that serves no purpose. That only serves the purpose of making you feel better about yourself. And this is not something that I actually promote on this channel. I promote becoming better and not feeling better. So to me, drug users aren't evil, and Toguro isn't evil. They're simply misguided. And whenever you're misguided, usually what ends up happening is that even if the choice that you made looked logical at first, you'll realize that the consequences of it won't be logical, meaning that you will not be getting the outcome that you expected because, in truth, the choice that you made previously was a bad choice. But sadly, most often in life with choices, you only really realize that they're bad when the consequences hit you in the face. And that is what happened to Toguro as well, because if you look at his life story and the choices that I explained to you guys, he is living a paradox, meaning that he lost his humanity in exchange for strength, and then spends the rest of his immortal existence seeking for more strength, which you would agree with me is inherently useless because he has no use for this strength. But the problem is that the only way for him to realize that his strength is useless would be to face someone strong enough to beat him up. The problem being that since Toguro lives in the human world, because he used to be human as well, the only people he encounters are also human, and humans are not strong enough to actually best him. So he's stuck in a hell of his own making. So he simply sinks deeper and deeper into his certitudes because no one is there to prove him that he is wrong, even though deep down he knows that he is wrong. And the proof I have of that is that he's constantly looking for someone to kill him, essentially. And we'll get back to that. But that's usually not the sign of someone who's doing well in life. If this morality that he espouses actually made him happy, I think there would be nothing to say about that. If I made a video about Hisoka from Hunter x Hunter, I would never be able to make the same points. Hisoka is the exact same. He seeks people who are stronger than him so that he can actually become stronger himself, but he's perfectly fulfilled in his life. He doesn't want to live his life any other way. The same is not true for Toguro at all, and that is the issue of his existence, is that the parameters of his morality do not actually align with his goals. And that is what I call living as a dead man. It's when you have a purpose, but the purpose has never really fulfilled you. So you still walk the earth in search of that purpose, trying to fulfill that purpose, but no action you do actually manage to get you that purpose and complete that purpose, because it's never really what you wanted in the first place. You have started to lie to yourself because you have started to deny yourself the right to be yourself. And in Toguro's case, your connection with the world might even be severed, which at this point, yes, you are dead. I think you are dead to rights, because having a beating heart does not qualify you as a living person. In my opinion, you have to have something more. And we see that with Toguro, because Toguro is alive. He's doing things in the plot. He is a living character in the plot. But the only actions he undertakes and the only thing that he seems to find satisfaction in is mindless violence. And that to me is entirely nihilistic, because violence doesn't produce anything. Again, at least in the case of Hisoka, when he kills others, he feels joy, he feels pleasure. So there's actually a payback to his actions. He is following the philosophy of hedonism. But the same cannot really be said for Toguro. The only thing that Toguro's violence manages to create is the ability to engage in more violence. And that is what I deem nihilistic. It's because his actions and his life only serve to perpetuate itself. There is no meaning to it, there is no purpose to it. He just exists to keep doing the same thing again and again and again. And I'm sure that this is something that you can relate to. This is not a fulfilling life. When the only reason why you get up in the morning is to be able to go to bed, then get up again, that's not a reason to live. Your reason to live now just becomes to live, but that's not living. That's simply surviving. And this is what happens when upstream you made a choice that didn't actually align with what you wanted, and now you're stuck in that loop. And I think that the same also applies to PD users, because oftentimes people who jump on drugs do so to accomplish a grand objective. So it could be, I want to get much stronger, I want to compete, I want to become bigger. And all of that serves their goal, it serves their purpose, because it allows them to justify it to themselves. It's the I only take drugs because I want to fulfill my dream to become bigger and stronger. And therefore, the use of drug is justifiable because it is to fulfill my dream. And as we all know, the grand goal of every man should be to fulfill their dream. And I don't necessarily even disagree with that because I'm an idealist, but I think that here there is a very big mistake and a very big error with that mindset in particular. And that is that it's an approach that proposes that the end justifies the means. However, we quickly find out that the drug intake that these people take doesn't stop the day the goal is achieved, because the dream will never be achieved. That's sort of the thing with dreams. If your dream is finite, you will find that the day you accomplish it, you are going to be extremely disappointed. So having a dream that is, in a sense, unreasonable and that will stay with you for the rest of your life because it keeps evolving with you, that tends to be the thing that keeps people going, that keeps people alive. And the same goes for bodybuilding. People who start taking drugs to get bigger, you think that they get to like a certain body weight and they stop? The dream keeps becoming bigger as they get bigger, so they want more and more and more. But that's an issue because these substances that these people have been using to fulfill their dream now become an end in themselves. You stop taking PEDs to achieve the dream. You take PEDs to keep getting bigger so as to keep the dream alive. And that is not the same, because now the original purpose has been replaced by the thing that was supposed to serve the purpose. And anyone who has fallen for drug addiction in the past knows exactly what I'm talking about. You start taking drugs to feel better, to feel more relaxed, to have fun, and before you know it, you don't even have fun anymore, but you're still taking that drug. Why? Because the drug has become an end in itself. Now you consume the drug in order to keep consuming the drug. Exactly like Toguro, who kills people and commits violence in order to be able to keep committing violence and to keep killing people. He doesn't actually really have a reason, because the reason disappeared a long time ago. And that is a form of escapism. Now, escapism in small doses is not dangerous. We all engage in it. We all need a break from reality from time to time. But if your only reality becomes that escapism, you understand that you're not really alive. You're actually already dead. The irony being that a lot of the time, these very same people I just described who take drugs, who follow these paths that lead nowhere, also tend to have an approach to life, or at least they tend to perceive their approach to life as being superior because it's more vital. You know, they're chasing their dreams, they're willing to sacrifice anything, they're more hardcore than you. But if we actually look at what's happening deep down, are they? Because they're not chasing anything. The only thing they're chasing is the dragon, but you will never actually catch the dragon. And this very irony is also present in the story of Toguro, because at some point, he confronts Genkai. Now, Genkai is a very interesting character as well. The only thing you have to know is that she is, or at least she used to be, Toguro's former lover. So they were together when they were younger. But unlike him, she refused to become a demon. She could have, but she refused. And instead, she accepted that aging, becoming weaker, losing people, and feeling pain was a natural part of human life. She never rejected that. And so, when she faces him in the story, she is very, very old. And she is greatly diminished, so she loses, of course. The guy is immortal, he has demon strength, of course, he completely wipes the floor with her. And yet, if you actually go and read the battle, you realize that at the end, the real loser is Toguro. Even though he kills Genkai, he still loses, because spiritually, all of his insecurities and all of the foolishness of his motivations were exposed. Because he was faced with someone who made the right choices in life, which made it also very evident that he personally made all of the wrong choices. And you see that in the battle, because Toguro tries really, really hard to prove to Genkai that he actually made the right choices, you know. And he says things like, see the strength you could have had, in a way, in an attempt to taunt Genkai, to tell her, hey, if you had just become a demon like me, look at what you could have become. And that is a scene that always stayed with me, because it's the same type of discourse that you hear PD users throw at natural lifters. So they'll tell us things like, oh, see the muscles you could have built if you jumped on drugs. Why are you wasting your life away being natural? You could just be much bigger if you just injected. All of that you're doing is for nothing, and I am personally doing things the right way. And of course, if you listen to what I say and you actually observe the psychology of these people and the philosophical dilemma behind it, you realize that this is not the case at all. But for someone who's untrained and for someone who's young, that type of discourse is extremely seductive and extremely tempting, because The only thing that goes on in your mind at that age is what you could have. That is what it means to be young. It's to be full of potential and therefore also full of things that you could accomplish. It's there, it's within your reach. You can get that if you just try. And this is why I think that this PD epidemic with young lifters is a simple symptom of this. The psychological bias has always been there, but now the modern world is actually providing young men with ways to actually fulfill that desire. Not even mentioning, as I said, the people that facilitate that desire because they actually feed the flames. They encourage people to embrace that type of choice. And this is why I don't want to just say, oh, this is stupid. We need to look at it for what it is. This is psychology, and in psychological term, this is named operating out of lack. And as I said previously, when you operate out of lack, it means that you are always focused on what you could have or could have had. It's never about what you already have or possess. It's about what you could obtain if you just did this certain thing. And you could tell me rightfully that this is just the nature of desire. But this is not just any desire, because this is fueled and motivated by the fear of underachievement, the fear of wasting your youth, the thing of not accomplishing everything you could accomplish. And again, you see that a ton with lifters who try to accomplish everything before the age of 25 because they seem to believe that past 25, it's already too late. And this is super destructive because, as I said, what happens then is that these people trade in their youth, they trade in their best years in order to have all of these things that they could have, which ultimately means that they also lose sight of what could be lost. And that is the issue with sacrifice. That is what Yu accrued so well. It shows you what sacrifice actually is. Many people looking at sacrifice think, oh, look at the consequences, look at what my sacrifice is going to accomplish. So in terms of drug use, it is, look at all of the gains I will get if I only sacrifice this much. But if you only looked at what you will lose in the sacrifice, then you will realize that there is much more to lose than there is to gain. And of course, that is also a coward's approach, because you could tell me, well, sacrifice was always about closing your eyes, about not looking at what you could lose. But that only really applies for the common good. It only applies if you're going to sacrifice yourself selflessly. The issue is that in this case, it's not selfless. Toguro's sacrifice is not selfless. The sacrifice of PDUs is not selfless. It's purely selfish. And in this case, yes, you should keep an eye on what could be lost, because most often you will find that you will lose much more than you will gain. And in the case of Toguro, this was strength and immortality. That's what he gained. And that's a lot. But what did he lose? He lost the ability to make human connections. And what is the point of living a long and really an infinite life if you cannot make human connections? So now you can just be alone for thousands of years. What is the point? Same for strength. What was the point of sacrificing human connections if you're just strong for yourself? I mean, we see the result. Toguro was just a killer. He was just using his strength to hurt other people and make them disappear. Is that useful? Is that what he wanted? Is that the goal of strength in the first place? I do not think so. So even though he gained a ton, much more than you would ever gain if you actually jumped on PEDs, what he lost in return was much worse. And that led to a morality that is entirely self-defeating. Not one that is evil, not one that is bad or stupid, but one that doesn't actually fulfill any purpose because it is entirely nihilistic. The only thing his life choices and therefore his morality led him to is the void. That's it. And this is what Nietzsche called a will to stupidity. Will to stupidity is a very interesting concept, one that is everywhere once you actually look for it, and it's something that Toguro also embodies perfectly. It's the action of renouncing reason and nuances in favor of absolute moral precepts. And I explained previously why people embrace that path. It's because it's much easier to go down a single road rather than having to deal with every single road. But I want to make clear that this doesn't mean that people who embrace will to stupidity are stupid themselves. Actually, it's quite the opposite. Someone like Toguro, for example, was extremely intelligent and he was full of empathy. And it's because he was full of empathy that he tried to shut it down by embracing will to stupidity. Now, after close observation, I've also come to the conclusion that this also applies to most people who embrace to stupidity. Because if you look at YouTube fitness in particular, it's everywhere. People who refuse to listen to anything else but their own voice, who are purely dogmatic, and who are just closed up to any other opinion are not dumb. They were not born this way. They turn themselves into that because it's a much easier way to navigate the wood. Because constantly doubting your own information and doubting your own assessment of reality can lead to madness. It has made some people insane. And actually that's exactly what happened to Sensui in Yu Hakusho, and I'll make a full video about Sensui eventually. It's what happened to Gero, I think it's Goro or Gero from Jujutsu Kaisen, and again, that would make a great topic for conversation. These are people who had a certain view of life and who then were faced with a completely contradicting view. So in the case of these two characters, they used to believe that humanity was inherently good and that what opposed humanity, meaning the demons and the curses, was bad. Then eventually they were faced with the proof, they were faced with a tangible proof that this was not true, and that some demons were good, some curses were good, and that some humans were evil. And instead of just accepting that this was a nuance, they broke, they shattered, and they just did a complete 180. So now they went to the complete direct opposite, which is that they believe that the entirety of humanity is evil and humanity needs to disappear. That is world to stupidity to a T. And if you take just one single look at ideologies such as religions and politics, you will realize that they rely heavily on it, meaning that they rely on people's ability to shut their eyes and only listen to what their church or what their political party is saying. Again, that is going to be a discussion for another day. But if there is such a thing as world to stupidity, there should be something else, right? If there is more absolute, there should be a complete opposite of it. And that complete opposite and antithesis is moral ambiguity, namely the action of seeing beyond good and evil. So someone who embraces moral ambiguity would be someone, for example, who is not a good person, but not a bad person either, meaning that they don't have grand ideals about what the world should be or shouldn't be. They just live their life following their own moral compass. So if there is no quantifiable difference between world to stupidity and moral ambiguity, then which one is better? Well, I don't have an answer for you. I think instead that we should think about it in terms of consequences. To me, if you can live with the consequences of your morality, then it's a good morality for you, and it's as simple as that. So if we look at Yuzuke and Toguro, Toguro has his own morality, it might be deemed evil, but that's not really the issue. The issue is that he's clearly not at peace with it. He doesn't accept it. Whereas Yuzuke, regardless of what he does, always accepts the consequences of his act. And this is in line with the Nietzschean concept of Amor Fati, which I am of course not pronouncing properly, which is a form of radical life affirmation in opposition with the type of self-denial that I already explained in relation to Toguro's character. So by accepting everything that happens to you as either good or at least necessary to your development, you prevent yourself from becoming a creature of resentment and from becoming a dead man. In a sense, you accept your fate for what it is. And it's not the same as fatalism. It's not just accepting fate as in give up and just let life happen to you. No, it's making life what you want it to be, but regardless of the consequences of your actions, you accept them as part of your journey. And this is exactly what Toguro failed to do and what Yuzuke does. And we see that with their different reactions to the death of their friends. When Toguro's friends die, he perceives it as a slight of the universe against him, which lead him to reject his humanity and transform into a monster, which you would agree is deeply paradoxical because it is his rejection of evil, which is a natural part of life, that led to him becoming evil in the first place. And we also see this pathological life rejection in his ability to accept aging as a natural part of life as a human. A mindset that I'm certain you've noticed is more and more widespread nowadays, which is why I said that even though we're talking about a fictional character that is an actual demon, it's crazy how relatable his troubles and his fight against his demons actually is. Look at the amount of people on TRT at like 25. Look at the amount of people who follow youth routines to never look old. What exactly are these people doing? Well, I'll tell you what they're doing. They're rejecting life. They're rejecting an integral part of life. Look at plastic surgery. Look at all of these women in their 50s who look all fucked up in the face because they just couldn't accept that their face is aging, which is perfectly normal. And these very same people would tell you that what they're doing is accepting life, is living life to the fullest. But is it? I personally argue that they're doing the exact opposite. And I'm not trying to say by that all transhumanist pursuits are inherently evil, only that they often end up becoming an end in themselves, and that is always the issue. When you lose sight of the reason why you did something in the first place, the thing becomes the reason. Let's take plastic surgery again. A woman will start by having her lips done or having Botox injections. Why? She wants to look younger. But before you know it, she's getting a third operation, then a fourth, then a fifth. What is she doing now? It's no longer about being young. It's about perpetuating the action of receiving plastic surgery for the simple sake of receiving plastic surgery. Because these operations no longer make her look young. It makes her look like a monstrosity. And the same can happen to, again, any attempt at staying young. If you want to stay young or to stay strong for its own sake, you're very likely to be directed towards processes that are natural and that only really involve yourself. But the second other implements or drugs or mechanisms are put in place to give you these things and grant you these things, you will quickly realize that there's going to be a tendency for you to become pathologically attached to these mechanisms, which eventually also means that your pursuit of that concept, of that youth or that strength, now becomes a direct detriment on your life. And this leads us back nicely to the concept of the Faustian bargain, which is the concept I announced earlier in the video when I told you that Toguro is a Faustian character. So a Faustian character is one that engages in a Faustian bargain, which is the trading of something with supreme spiritual or moral value for something of worldly or material value. And it's a very common literary trope. It's found, for example, if you're French, in La Peau de Chagrin by Balzac, in which the main character, Raphael, obtains a chagrin that grants him any wish but shrinks around him. And as it shrinks, his life expectancy shrinks with it. So in the case of Raphael, he is trading his longevity for his desires. But in Yu Yu Hakusho, it's a bit more subtle, because what Toguro had to trade in exchange for strength and immortality was his soul, which is an intangible with no quantifiable qualities. So unlike the use of PEDs, which would qualify as a basic Faustian bargain, because you exchange vitality and longevity for muscular gains, Toguro's situation is much more complex, because at face value, and unless of course you're spiritual or religious, he doesn't actually lose anything. Because what is the soul? Can you point to your soul right now? How much does your soul weigh? Where is it located in your body? We don't know exactly, right? There's a reason why philosophers have been arguing about the nature of the soul for thousands of years. And yet, the story insists that he did indeed lose something of value. Because what he lost essentially is his human heart, his ability to feel human emotions, to feel human connections. And without it, without that ability, he became disconnected from the world that he started to resent and therefore reject, and he simply turned into a monster. And naturally, if you have read Berserk, this should of course make you think of Behelit. It should of course make you think of apostles, because the theme of the Faustian bargain is omnipresent in Berserk. And I flirted with the idea of making a video with both Yu Yu Hakusho and Berserk, but I've realized that mixing the two stories would be well too confusing. So instead, I'll make a full segment, a full philosophical essay centered specifically around the themes of sacrifice and morality in relation, of course, to the story of Griffith. But if you cannot wait and you want to get your dose of Berserk, check out the description. There is a long video about individuality in the universe of Berserk in relation to the character of Guts that if you've missed, I'm certain you're going to greatly enjoy. But all of that to say what? Why did I talk so much about the Faustian bargain? Well, it's because if a Faustian bargain, as complex and subtle as one for the soul, can clearly be demonstrated as having a negative outcome on the character of Toguro, I think you would actually agree with me that one as simple as the trade that PEDs have you make of your longevity against muscle gains should therefore also be regarded as one that is inherently negative and not worth the sacrifice. Any deal with the devil is one that can only satisfy you in the short term, but whose price will eventually far outweigh the benefits. In summary, the only sacrifice worth making is one done with an earnest purpose, not an anti-purpose. Let me explain that in details because it's a bit complex. So let's look at Toguro. Toguro is a good example of someone who follows an anti-purpose because his why is actually a because. And I know that this is not clarifying anything for anyone, so let me continue. To the question, why do you want more strength? Toguro's answer is to become stronger, which is not a reason. It's just justifying the mean by the end, but in this case, there is no end, so the mean justifies itself. And this is the fastest way to waste your life away. Because in the case of Toguro, he wasted his wish. Since he never really had a reason to wish for strength in the first place, once he got the strength, he never knew what to do with it. And that, of course, perfectly mirrors the character of Faust, which gave its name to the Faustian bargain. Because Faust, for example, I believe got 24 years of magical powers and infinite knowledge, but he spent the 24 years doing nothing with it because he never really had a reason to get that thing in the first place. So both characters are caught in the loop of their own poor life decisions and can sadly only be freed by death, which is even more tragic because since a Faustian bargain is first and foremost, as we saw, a spiritual suicide, which eventually leads to an actual suicide, Toguro could have avoided that, because keep in mind that we know from the story that it's not him becoming a monster that had him lose his soul. It's the fact that he could never forgive himself for being too weak to protect his comrades. And this is why I picked him. It's because ultimately in Yu Yu Hakusho, the fact that he becomes a monster is irrelevant. He turned himself into a monster. So if it happened to him, it can happen to you. Because there is nothing magical about a Faustian bargain. There's no such thing as the devil. If you ever strike a deal with the devil and reality, you struck a deal with yourself, and you will be the only person to blame for the consequences of that deal. But that's also a good news because it means that as long as you understand the psychology behind that type of action, that type of decision and choices, you can avoid it. And to continue on with that point, there's also something very interesting that I like to point out here. He who partakes in a deal with the devil essentially becomes the devil because there was never a devil in the first place, you just made a deal with yourself. And if we look again at the symbolism behind the figure of the devil, what is the devil? The devil is someone who gave up his connection to God. Now, in an atheistic term, or at least a non-theist term, to me, this means his connection to spirituality, meaning his connection to himself, and to an understanding of the self that goes beyond the flesh. All of that in the hope of receiving material wealth. And it is said in Christian and Islamic theology that the role of Satan is to test humans. Meaning that what he's really attempting to do is he's trying to bring us down to his level. He's trying to turn us into him. What does it mean? Well, to me, it means that there are psychological impulses within any man that if they are followed in order to fulfill desires, material desires, might very well lead to the renouncement of the soul, meaning the deeper connection with your true purpose. And that would not only be bad for you, it would also be bad for the people around you. And again, Toguro is a great example because Toguro goes as far as to try and turn Yuzuke into him. Because in their final confrontation, he is desperately trying to convince Yuzuke to reject his humanity and to become a monster like him. And why does he do that? He does this because he's hoping to salvage his Faustian bargain. He's trying to prove to himself that he didn't sell his soul for nothing. Because if he can convince Yuzuke to go down the same path, then this might mean that his morality and his choice wasn't so dumb after all. And this is, by the way, a deeply empathic way to look at the figure of Satan as someone who is suffering and who, in his suffering, is trying to pull down as many humans as he can, because that way he's less alone, misery loves company type of thing. Une interprétation qui ne sera pas enseignée en catéchisme l'an prochain. But to get back to this tendency of Toguro and of people of his ilk to try and pull down other people down with them, it's a psychological bias again, and one that has a name also. It's called the sunk cost fallacy, and that is extremely common amongst men who follow all or nothing ideologies. The idea behind it is that since you've already sacrificed so much for your ideal, it might be worth it to double down on it, because if you pull out now and if you accept to yourself that your choice was the wrong choice, all you've sacrificed in the past for that choice and for that dream will be for absolutely nothing. And many people are simply not willing to do that. Many people are much more comfortable living in cognitive dissonance, living with a lie, as long as they don't have to face the fact that they were wrong. And this, of course, is a logical fallacy, because it does exactly what I explained previously. The mean ends up justifying the mean. Because if you keep sacrificing because you've already sacrificed so much, then you are not re-sacrificing for any reason. Your sacrifice becomes the reason for the sacrifice. And it's important to understand that bias because it explains why PD users who know they're about to die, there have been people on this platform who knew they were about to croak, simply couldn't stop. They simply couldn't back off from their commitment. And that's not because they were stupid, and it's not because they were evil. They were simply stuck in a loop of bad choices which prevented them from thinking rationally. And sadly, just like with Toguro, the only thing that can end this self-destructive cycle is death. The problem being that oftentimes these types bring others down with them, as in their attempt to justify their own choices to themselves, to justify the Faustian bargain to themselves. They also indirectly promote the very ideology that got them in that situation in the first place. And because absolute ideals are attractive, because of will to stupidity, these people often turn into the reason why others strike a pact. And this is why I said that striking a pact with the devil turns you into the devil. And that is the pinnacle of selfishness. It's to be so consumed by your ambition that you are willing to give up humanity. You are willing to become the devil. However, remember that this wasn't Toguro's intention. Originally, the intention behind his sacrifice was good. And it's because it's a very thin line between selfless and selfish. And to prove that to you, I'm going to quote directly from the Bible. The Bible says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests." I don't necessarily agree with that. What I find fascinating with this quote is that this is exactly what Toguro did. He valued his friends so much that when he eventually lost them, he decided to punish himself for their death, and he sacrificed his humanity, which ultimately led to him living a life of pure selfishness. All of that not to dismiss what the Bible says, but just to let you guys know that just because the intention behind the sacrifice is good or virtuous does not mean that the consequences of said sacrifice won't be evil. And this is why, of course, you have some people who claim that Griffith did nothing wrong. I'm not going to get into that tonight, but the same logic applies here. If Griffith's sacrifice of the Band of the Oak led to a better world with less violence and with less war, couldn't we say that the sacrifice was in fact good and that therefore Griffith himself is not evil but good? These are interesting questions, and if you are vested, if you want more answers, I can only recommend you read Yu Yu Hakusho, Berserk, and Nietzsche, because all three center around that theme of moral ambiguity. But Yuzuke, to get back to the story, on the other hand, in opposition to Toguro, is not selfish at all, which does not mean that he cares for others. Instead, I define him as a pure egoist, meaning that he puts his own welfare above that of others most of the time, which I would argue is the correct way to lead one life, because it most often leads to choices and therefore consequences that you won't regret and that are also very unlikely to hurt others. For example, when Yuzuke sacrifices, he does it simply because the person that he's saving matters to him. So contrary to selfishness, egoism isn't linked with antisocial traits. And that is directly visible in the nature of the sacrifice that both Yuzuke and Toguro underwent. While they both blamed themselves for not being able to protect their friends, Yuzuke was actually able to use that as a motivation to keep fighting, which is a form of egotistic affirmation, while Toguro only used this tragedy as an excuse to give up, which is a form of selfless, and therefore also in this context, selfish rejection of life. And this theme of rejection also persists past death, because even once he enters the spiritual world, Toguro is still not done punishing himself. He actually chooses and elects to go to hell out of his own volition, which directly mirrors the story of Faust, because as you might know, he also goes to hell. The moral of the story here being that he was never able to let go of the guilt. He was never able to let go of the consequences of his choices. And that is the difference between heaven and hell. As for answering the question of the title, I believe that the response will vary depending on your moral compass. As such, I won't be giving you an absolute answer, as it would entirely defeat the purpose of this philosophical essay, as well as constituting an insult to your agency as a man. However, I would like to reflect on a few things. Yesterday, I posted a poll where I asked you directly which of the following between your health, relationships, or soul you would be most likely to sacrifice for gains. You can see the results on your screen right now. The vast majority of people answered that they weren't willing to sacrifice any of them, while 8% said that they would be willing to sacrifice their relationships or soul. Only 1% of testers were willing to sacrifice their health, which I find ironic, considering that this is the very quality that those who decide to jump on drugs will inevitably lose. I believe the reason for this discrepancy to be twofold. One, the majority of people who took that poll are members of the natural community, meaning that they are much more health conscious than your average gym rat. And two, because health is concrete and tangible. You know what being unhealthy feels like, but you don't know what impact being soulless could have on your life. Likewise, you might greatly underestimate what it means to lose your ability to make human connections, which is why so many were willing to sacrifice their relationships for gains. This is why I wanted to make that video, to offer a reflection on these things that we often take for granted, and the choices that might lead us to lose them in order to help us realize their value before it is too late. I will continue making philosophical essays based on my favorite fictions, the next one being another Berserk analysis. If you enjoy this type of content and would like to support my work, you can do so by clicking the first link in the description. Any pledge or donation is greatly appreciated. And I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you for watching, and have a good night.